Welcome to your storytelling. Enjoy the stories, and don't forget to subscribe. I was sipping my morning coffee when I heard the knock. It was firm, urgent. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened the door, two men in suits stood there. "Mrs. Carter?" one asked. I nodded. "We're with the FBI. We need to talk about your husband." My heart stopped. I laughed nervously. "You must have the wrong person." But they didn't. They knew everything. His name, our address, even details about our life. "He's not who you think he is," one agent said. My stomach twisted. I turned to call for James, but he was gone. The agents asked to come inside. I let them in, still in shock. They handed me a file. Inside were pictures of my husband, different names, different cities. My hands shook. This isn't possible," I whispered. "I've been married to him for 6 years." "He's been running for a long time," one agent said. "And you've been living with a man who doesn't exist." My mind raced. Was James even his real name? I felt sick. "Where is he?" I asked. The agent sighed. "That's what we're trying to find out." Desperate for answers, I searched the house. The FBI watched as I tore through drawers. Then, in our closet, I found a locked box. My hands shook as I forced it open. Inside were fake IDs, stacks of cash, and a burner phone. My husband was a ghost. I sat there, holding the box, unable to breathe. The FBI agents exchanged glances. "Your husband has been involved in serious criminal activity," one of them said softly. "We suspect he's been laundering money across several states." My head spun. How could I not have known? The agents gave me a moment to process. I tried to absorb the truth, but it was like I was living in a nightmare. "He was always so kind, so attentive," I muttered, feeling the tears welling up. How could he lie to me for so long? They didn't have answers, only questions. They told me James had vanished. No phone calls, no messages. Just gone. "Is he dangerous?" I asked, my voice shaking. The agent hesitated. "We don't know what he's capable of now. He's been under investigation for months." I was terrified. Was he going to come back for me? I had to know more about the man I had married. I spent hours on the phone with his old friends, searching for clues. Everyone described him differently. A charming businessman, a quiet neighbor, a caring husband. None of them knew the truth, and I was starting to feel like a fool. A week passed. I was still trying to put the pieces together when I got another surprise visit. This time, it wasn't the FBI, it was a woman. She claimed to know James. Her eyes were filled with anger and fear. "I've been waiting for you to find out," she said, her voice shaking. The woman introduced herself as Anna, and my world shifted again. She had been with James for years, even before I met him. "He lied to me too," she confessed, her voice breaking. "He promised me he'd leave his past behind, but it's all been a lie." I felt betrayed all over again. Anna told me about their past together, how James had promised her the world, but had been involved in shady dealings long before I even knew his name. He'd disappear for days at a time, leaving me with nothing but empty promises, she said, her eyes haunted by the memories. She showed me more documents, bank statements, flight records, even evidence that James had been meeting with criminals across the country. My heart broke as I realized how deeply he'd lied. How could I have been so blind? I asked myself, how could I not see it? The FBI kept in touch, telling me they were closing in on James. "We have reason to believe he's planning something big," the agent said. "We need your help to catch him." My emotions were torn. I wanted to help, but I was terrified. Could I really turn in the man I had loved? As I struggled with the decision, I received an anonymous letter. It was a warning. "If you talk to the FBI, you'll be sorry," it said. My heart dropped. Was James behind this? Had he already found out what I was doing? My fear deepened as I realized the danger was much closer than I had imagined. I couldn't escape the crushing weight of betrayal. James was a complete stranger to me now. The love I had felt for him was tainted, twisted by all the lies. As I thought about his promises, his gentle words, I felt like I had been living in a fantasy. How could I have been so wrong about everything? Days passed, and there was no sign of James. The FBI was still tracking him, but he seemed to have vanished off the grid. It felt like the calm before the storm. I waited for the moment when everything would collapse, when my life would finally shatter into pieces. Just as I was starting to lose hope, I got a call from the FBI. They had tracked James to a secluded cabin in the mountains. "We need you to help us, Mrs. Carter," the agent said. "He trusts you. This might be our only chance to catch him." I felt a wave of dread. Was I really ready to face him again? I stood at a crossroads. The FBI wanted me to meet James, to pretend I was still his wife, to lure him out. "We'll be watching, but you'll be on your own with him," the agent warned. The thought of confronting him terrified me, but I couldn't sit back and do nothing. My life was already destroyed. What more could happen? I agreed to the plan. With my heart pounding, I drove to the cabin. My hands were clammy on the steering wheel, and every inch closer to the place felt like a step into the unknown. What was I walking into? And if I saw him again, would I even recognize the man I once loved? When I arrived at the cabin, my breath caught in my throat. There he was, James. But he was different. Older, more hardened. The man I had married was barely recognizable. He didn't seem to notice me at first. As he paced back and forth, his face tense with worry. I stepped forward, my voice shaky. "James." His head snapped up, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of recognition in his eyes. "Sarah?" he asked, his voice low and cautious. It was as if he was trying to figure out if I was a threat or a lifeline. I could hardly breathe. This was it, the confrontation I never thought I'd have. We sat down across from each other, the silence between us thick with unspoken words. "You never told me the truth," I said, my voice breaking. "Why? Why did you lie?" He seemed to hesitate, then looked away. "I didn't want you to be part of that world," he muttered, as if that would explain everything. James' story was filled with half-truths and excuses. He told me about his criminal past, the people he owed money to, the dangerous deals he'd been forced into. But the more he spoke, the more I realized. He had made his choices long ago, and I had never been part of them. My heart shattered. The FBI had been watching from a distance, waiting for the right moment to intervene. But they needed my signal. The weight of the decision was crushing me. Was I willing to betray the man I had loved? Was it even possible to save him? And what would my life look like once I made that choice? I stared at James, torn between the love I had once felt for him and the reality of his actions. "You should have trusted me," I whispered, fighting back tears. "We could have faced this together." He looked at me, guilt written across his face. "I never wanted to pull you into this mess," he said quietly. But the damage was done. I knew what I had to do. I couldn't protect him anymore. I couldn't live in a world of lies. I took a deep breath and nodded at the FBI agents who were waiting just outside. They stormed in, their presence overwhelming. James' eyes widened as they handcuffed him. "No, please, Sarah," he begged. But it was too late. The days that followed were a blur of questions, paperwork, and media coverage. James was taken into custody, facing charges that shocked even me. I was left to pick up the pieces of my shattered life, to process the betrayal, and to understand how everything I thought I knew had been a lie. I moved out of the house we once shared. It felt like an empty shell now, a place filled with memories that no longer made sense. I began the long process of healing, of finding myself again. It wasn't easy, but I had to. I had to rebuild, to trust again, even if it took time. Looking back, I realized that discovering the truth had been the first step toward freedom. It had been painful, devastating, but necessary. I didn't need to live in the shadow of his lies anymore. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe. I was free. Thank you for listening to my story until now. If you liked the video, please support it by subscribing and liking.